On this video, we're back on the 73 Challenger. If you watched the previous videos, you saw where the car got to this stage. It's pretty much converted over and protected from the elements, and all the stuff on the car minus the firewall is going to be kept for another day. We're going to install some new panels right now. We're not going to go into the complete detail as I've done videos in the past. If you look on 72 Challengers, this car exactly on floor pans, we probably will cover the trunk in a little further detail. But what we're going to install in this video, we're going to start on with these frame rails. You can see on these frame rails, I test fit everything before the videos. This is in general too, just so I know I make marks where I'm going to sand them down to bare metal and where we're going to put the primer, the weld through primer. What we're doing here, these marks are on my jig. They were actually a little bit off. I have 3 of these cars in the shop right now, so we actually went back through and I measured those cars, and yeah, we had to move these, just kind of hone them out an eighth of an inch to about a 1/4 inch so the frame rail slid forward. Once we did that, everything else, as you'll see hopefully in the video a little bit, fits right in and is good to go. So just a little bit of information, if you are using a jig points, that not all these holes are exactly perfect. Same thing with this one, they both had to be moved exactly the same. Like I said, I verified that on 3 other cars, but we'll get the frame rails in first, we'll get them welded into the torsion bar support, then we're gonna put our main trunk floor in. You could see this is a good example. I left it like this before we prepped it and ground it down. I basically installed this in the car, screwed it down, and then I traced out where all my frame rails are gonna go. That gives me a good point reference where to put my holes that we're gonna weld it. And yes, we do have a spot welder like they would have from the factory, but it's not gonna reach any of these areas. So we're gonna do this with a MIG welder, and we're gonna grind it down just like most anyone at home. You can see this area has no holes in it. That's gonna be for our future subframe connectors. It's gonna be easier to prep it now. So we're gonna just sand everything in the white down to at least bare metal. We'll probably go over a little bit more, put some weld through primer on that, and then we'll be good to go. We're also gonna install the rear toe pans, which we also have them. We have all our holes drilled out and marked in our certain areas. And then the last thing we're gonna install on the front of this car is gonna be the front part of the chassis stiffening kit. The good thing about this, usually we leave this till the radiator support's on, but my jig works in the sense that when this comes on, this radiator support's gonna sit right here. It jigs up where I had it, where it holds that right against it, and I'll show you where we verify to make sure that's good. We're gonna just tack that in, finish that, and that's gonna stiffen up the whole bottom base of this car. From there, we'll go ahead and we got some other parts we're waiting on the firewall, then we'll take that step. Let's go ahead and look at the trunk too. I got a Cuda here. I want to show you some differences on and similarities on the Cuda and Challenger trunk floor that may help you out. All right, we have our trunk prepped out, same thing as the floor pan. It sat in the car, everything we know fits. We're gonna go over our trunk gas tank straps, and I like to put these on before we put it in the car, then we're not working upside down. And then actually right here on this portion of it, it won't fit if they don't go in beforehand. You'd have to cut them and modify them. Like I said, they can go in. But while we're here, we got the Cuda on the rotisserie, and this is a Challenger trunk floor. I want to show you some of the differences that if, you know, part supply availability is an issue, you might be able to work something and still be able to restore your car. What we're looking at right here is the gas tank filler for the Challenger. The Cuda, if you see, is back here. This is exactly the same floor pan, 71 to 74 Cudas and Challengers. They actually have the indentation. The hole is just cut open here for the Cuda, and then this is sealed up when you buy the Cuda versus Challenger. So depending on what model you have, the trunk floor is exactly the same. The holes line up, everything else. The holes either going to be here for the Challenger or here for the Barracuda / Cuda. The 70s, the only major difference that I'm aware of is right here in 71 to 74, you have your shock bolt holes, where the 70s, I believe, are going to be up here like that. So really, if you come into a bind and there's a part shortage, you should be able to go ahead and just buy a trunk floor if you need to and then modify it to those specifications. Now, where to put these trunk straps. I'm going to put it on the video, maybe help some of you out. I measured off, a couple of these cars over the time, and I have some notes. What we're looking at, give or take, now the straps on a factory one usually comes a little bit straighter, so your numbers might be a little bit off, but the gas tank also has some wiggle room in there. What I'm looking at, and now trunk floor is upside down, so what we're looking at, this is going to be the driver's side, and this would be the passenger side. But we're looking at 3 1/4 inches from the hole to the trunk strap, the gas tank strap in the front, 4 1/8 from the hole to the gas tank strap. Then if we go on the passenger side, 2 1/2 from the hole to the gas tank strap, and all these match this car too, which also is an aftermarket AMD panel and has the same aftermarket trunk straps. And then this back hole is 3 1/2. These are reference marks. Where I like to really measure off more is the center here. I feel like if I go from here to there, that's 2 7/8 and 2 3/4 on the gas tank side. This in the back is 2 1/4, and then this matched up perfect to 2 1/4 on both these sides. What you see also, you should see these gas tank straps kind of hugging this back indent. They almost follow the angle of that. They're about 1/8 of an inch off where it starts curving down. So put these on first. You see we have them screwed down. I'm going to pull them up. Normally then you would drill your holes in the trunk floor, and I would weld from the top down, because then you have a stronger backing here. You're going to see, I'll show you in the video how I do it. We are going to use a spot welder on this. It should reach everywhere. So follow along. We'll start this process. We'll go over a couple things and hopefully talk you through everything we can to the best of our ability and have a good solid base on this car when this video is over.
All right, the first step once we get the trunk floor off the Challenger is going to be, now we have to clean everything down to bare metal to be able to weld to the frame rails. The frame rails in the car, if you watch the last videos, already prepped with the weld through primer and was stripped down to bare metal. So we'll just do the floor pan. It's a little bit easier doing the brand new metal. I use different things to strip these floor pans, chassis, everything down to bare metal. Right now with this floor pan with a lot of flat surfaces, the Eastwood SCT with a red stripping drum with some sandpaper on it was easiest on this. I do switch over to the black stripping drum. That also works well on the SCT, and you'll see we're going to have to go back through and clean up with a smaller sander that will be able to get into all the areas that the big stripping drum can't. Flap disc does work well also here. You could see one laying right behind me. I've used on other parts of this panel and other panels. I'll also use DA sanders, anything to really get something down to bare metal. You don't want to dig into the metal too much and take any metal off of it. We're just trying to take the E-coating off is the whole goal behind this. If you don't have a belt sander and do a lot of metal work, I recommend getting one of these mini belt sanders. They're great for reaching in tight spots. They offer all kind of different grits depending on your application. It really is a tool that I use all the time and highly recommended.
All right, so we got our frame rails prepped out. They should be ready to go in, so let's see what we can do here. I will say I did drill the holes a little bigger on the frame rail pieces. I'm using the 3/8 inch hole saw, a spot weld cutter basically, and that's going to give me a little bit stronger weld on these thicker pieces. So let's get this in there. I also did shave a little bit off here. How my jig works, I gotta go up and over. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna look for the back hole first. And there we go. Just got to move. Now, this is why we jig it up. You might want to put it here and it might look okay, but you see we're not in this front hole slot, so you have to just move it a little bit. And that's it, we're on. Now we're gonna put our 2 K-member bolts in. I will say this frame rail, it did work really well in every other hole. You see it fits perfect. It goes right against the torsion bar in the back, and even all this area is jigged up perfect from what I can tell so far. So I am really happy. That one hole was a real small thing in a grand scheme of things. All right, let's get the other frame rail in. Now, another thing I did have to do on this one, I'll show you. We were just a little bit tight right here. This was rubbing against the K-member. So I ground this back a little bit and just re-welded. We're talking, again, less than a 1/16 of an inch. So stuff like this you're gonna run into. Let's set this one in. Same process. There we go. This one took a little bit more to set down in its spot, but we got it. And the screws, you want them for the K-member bolts to be able to hand go in there. You don't want to have them binding up. Now, here's one more thing you could see. This one's having a hard time going in with the screw. We are jigged here, we are jigged here, so what we're gonna have to do, we're gonna just help it along. Like I said, I wanna make sure we go in so we're just gonna push it over a little bit and just roll that frame rail over. It should help a little bit. And there we go. If you come around here, you can see I'm hand tightening these screws in. So that's what you want. So now, before we release this, we're going to get this one in there really good. And see, when we tighten the jig, it's going to straighten this out. So we're going to get it pretty snug, and we're going to let go of this. Finish tightening it. And you see we got our gap there. I double checked that K-mount there. That's where we were hitting. You see we're right in line with all these points. So let's finish tightening this up. All right, so now we got the frame rails bolted in place. That's a good sign. You see they went right in with minimal amount of moving and twisting. I'm going to go back through here to the torsion bar support, MIG weld them in on our holes, and then we got, we got to pull the brackets off the old frame rail. I didn't do that yet. We're going to pull these brackets off, and we're going to put them on both sides. So we'll come back, these brackets will be pulled off, prepped, we'll put them in, and we'll continue on the floor pan.
You can see now we have all our holes drilled out for where we're going to weld into our frame rails, and we're going to go ahead and put the seat support brackets on. I'm just clamping them on first, and then you see we're going to be able to reach this with the spot welder. Normally if you're doing this from home, I would put holes on the inside of these brackets. I had to do it in the front where the spot welder didn't reach, and then you're going to weld as you're clamped from the top going down. You can do this in the car too. It's just, for me, with the spot welder, it's easier to pre-prep these brackets and be able to get to them beforehand. Another piece of advice, you see the bare metal on the brackets. If you at home, if you're welding something and you know it's bare metal, leave it open to the elements. Just use the weld through primer on the seams that are sandwiched between it. Moving back onto the frame rails before we install this floor pan, we're going to do these brackets. What else I didn't show in the back, I hooked a strap from the frame jig to each of the frame rail and just pulled it in just a 1/4 inch just to make sure we get it exactly in the same spot the frame rails were in. I say this, and I said it in the past, a frame jig is key. You see with the front frame rails and everything, I don't know how you would bend and modify, especially these larger parts, without pulling it and pushing it against a frame jig while still holding the rest of the car together. Same thing with the back of these frame rails. If we didn't have a jig, we'd almost be stuck just where the frame rails sit from the factory. And we know these stampings are great, and it's awesome to have these stampings, but they still are not 100% perfect. They are just get you close enough that you can modify at the very end. And I guess you can relief cut them, but to me that's a lot of work versus putting a strap on and just cranking down on it. As we're bringing the floor pan over, I did say that this floor pan was already set in this car. That's how we got the trace marks, everything else. What I also did before was take sheet metal screws, since I'm by myself, and I'm going to screw down in all the areas I might have open air on the floor pan, especially around that tunnel hump. Same thing as the frame rails. The tunnel hump is really good, but especially in these cars that are 50, 60 years old, they're not perfect. The first thing before I did put my sheet metal screws, I'm lucky to have these bolts for the outer seats on jigged up on my jig. So I locate those bolts, and that's going to center our floor pan on the bottom brackets. The bolts are exactly the same size. First thing I do then, I usually take my monkey on a stick and I work my way to the center tunnel hump. That seems to me the hardest part to line up on anything else. The floor pans just want to kick up, and then when pushing that down, it takes the back of the floor pan where the toe pans come in line with, and it lifts them back up where it has to go. If you go ahead and weld the floor pans before doing the firewall area, I feel like the back of the floor pan would just sag down too much. So now that we got the front tunnel hump to the firewall all screwed in place, we went and we tightened the seat bolts on our jig so we know they're down. And now I'm taking the screws and I'm following almost my welding pattern. And now these screws, most of the holes were already in place. That's what I did for my mock-up. So you see I'm just ripping right through these along with the holes. I'll add 1 or 2 more in if I feel like it's sticking up somewhere. But all in all, this part of the assembly should go a lot faster because everything's been pre-mocked up. Now the welding portion begins. You see, I'm following, like I said, my sheet metal screw path down. I use a body hammer and the welder, and just one at a time working my way down the frame rail. I do weld more spot holes than the factory would. I noticed by where I rip them off, we're going to do a lot more. I feel it's going to be stronger, and I don't think there's really a downside to that. Compared to any other portion of the car, I really think if you do a floor pan, that's a lot more welding and the trunk pan than anywhere else. Once we got the front floor pans welded in, we'll go ahead and tackle the driver's side toe pan first. That's the one that lays on the bottom. You could tell by the groove along the underside of the car, and then the passenger side lays right over it. So I like to screw it in first, or push it in, whatever you got to do, back into the frame rail first. You want to get it hugged against the back, and then I'm screwing down into the rear frame rails. I like to walk the back channel along straight because that's the part that I know I want to line up first. And then the front, where the two floor pans meet each other, I feel like they have the most give. So I usually go that second to last and then follow the rocker panel last. This is going to be the same process that I'm welding. I try, like I said on the last one, I try to screw out the panel in the same order that I would weld it. It's just good practice, and it makes me test fit and make sure I'm not going to come up with any major gaps anywhere. Same thing on the passenger side, toe pan. Go ahead and just screw this one in, and then we'll start the welding process. If you see on the main floor pan, I still haven't ground down any of the welds except the parts that are going to overlap toe pan to floor pan. You can go ahead and finish off most of the floor pan. I feel like I like to work in sections. It makes things more efficient. I'm only taking certain tools out, and I finish that part of the car, and then I go back. That's the same thing I feel in general. If you're doing body work, you just take the whole car in sections. We're working, from the front to back to front, whatever. I kind of go back and forth. I have a process where we get at least the base of the car done depending on what parts it needs, and then we finish all the metal work first. We get a good base with epoxy, and then once I start the body work phase, I shouldn't be touching welders anymore. Just a little bit to bit. I know I'm getting ahead, but same thing with these floor pans. I'm not going to start the grinding process unless I have to until I'm ready to grind the whole project that I'm doing. Back to the MIG welder. I used the 3/16. Some of the larger areas I got 1/4 inch holes, and you want to run a hot enough power setting, especially since some of these are going to frame rail sections, and this is the base of the car. So you want to really get a good penetration on everything. You should be able to look under the floor pan and actually see your welds where you've welded. If you're not seeing that good penetration, you need to readjust your power settings or go take some scrap pieces and start practicing before you tackle something like this. Also, don't be surprised if you have to go under the car and just tap the body hammer back up from underneath. Some of these parts, especially standing on them and hitting down all the time, you'll have to go back through there. We're on to the gas tank straps. I showed you how to measure them out and mock them up. We put the screw holes in them, so now we know exactly where they have to go now that the weld through primer has covered up all our markings. We're going to take the spot welder, and like I said, I'm going to start in the center, and I'm going to work my way down, right down the frame rail, and I'm going to wrap it back around. This is more how the factory would do it. This would be the same thing on the floor pan braces. If you're at home, I would mark these, and then I would drill them just like the floor pan. Drill the holes in there. I would put the screws on, flip the floor pan over, and then MIG weld down the center. And I would do these straps 100% before you put the trunk pan on the car. That should make the project easier, and actually I'll go ahead and clean up the welds too before the trunk pan's on the car. Then you're not fighting under the deck filler panel or in the corners. You're right there and you can get access to everything and really do a good job. That will also enable you not to cut off the back tabs, because those two tabs at the end you see where they're bare metal, they're going to actually go on the rear cross frame piece. So these have to be put in first. Now that you got the gas tank straps in, we're going to go ahead and install this trunk floor. As you can see, everything's got the weld through primer. I'll go back through with some epoxy and clean up the bare metal that I can spray at the end. One more thing we'll go over. We didn't do it on this car, but just for your information, I did it on other cars if you look through other videos. But the rear seat floor pan that goes under the rear seat is the first thing I would do when installing all these floor pans. To me, everything meets in the toe pan section, and the toe pans overlap and go on top of the rear seat pan and the front floor pan. So I personally would do the rear seat pan. I would work my way up to the front full floor pan, do the toe pans, and then finish it off with this trunk floor last, if you're doing an entire bottom section on one of these e-body cars. Installing this trunk, you see I measured it side to side in the back. I think that's the key to this trunk, and the number one thing before you clamp and screw everything in is you just want to make sure it's centered. It's centered in the front. I luckily had the inner wheel wells to center me off where I didn't have any real wiggle room there, but especially in the back. That's going to be the basis for your trunk drop-offs going to your quarter panels, and your whole tail section is going to be centered off that. So take the time, double check all that. You can go off the frame rails. Just take other reference points. There's a center point of the trunk right down it. You could center off the cross frame piece. Lots of different ways. Make sure it's centered. Everything else on this trunk floor is pretty straightforward. You can go ahead, you see I'm welding in the center front and I'm working my welds towards the back. I have also done it, and there's many ways to do it, working in the back where the Cuda gas tank filler hole would be, and working my way from the center out, and then working my way up the frame rails. You just want to go with a certain path and just push the metal where you're not going to get an air pocket where the floor pan's stuck up and you don't have a good weld. If you ever notice, trunk pans have a hole in the back of them, and I believe this might be the reason why factory, there's no way to get this spot welder in. I'm assuming the factory's the same way, that with the frame rail there, the spot welder doesn't open enough. So they put this hole right over the frame rail where you see you kind of walk the spot weld right into the inner frame rail, and then you're welding right back down. I'm going as far forward with my spot welder as I can. I know where it was. I already pre-tested this, where my MIG welder stops, and I'm going to just keep walking right down one frame rail. This right now, I'm showing you the real time how fast the spot welder works, because a lot of our videos are sped up. So this would be the normal speed of the spot welder. It's not as fast as it looks in the video, but it still is faster than cutting the hole, welding, MIG welding the hole, and then cleaning up a regular hole. And it's nice, once you get the settings on the spot welder preset and everything's good, you have the right attachment for it, you see I can just walk right down a frame rail, and it's just a repetitive motion. And I know just from the sound of it whether a weld's good or not, or have to re-hit that weld. And you can also see it when it's all said and done. I walk my way to the inside frame rail on this side, and also what's nice about the spot welder, just for your information, when you're squeezing it, this thing pneumatically pushes the floor pan to the frame rail together, which kind of lets me ease on the clamps and hitting it with the body hammer to make sure I got a good contact. A key thing on this spot welder, along with you MIG welding, is just make sure your two surfaces, where they're meeting, there's going to be weld through primer, but make sure they're clean. You can't have rust in there. You don't want to be welding over all this stuff and have it risk the structure, the integrity of your weld. I'm not going to lie, it makes it a whole lot easier when 3/4 of the car is pretty much thrown away and we're able to come back through with new metal upon new metal, and you know what you're welding to is solid and you're not going to find any surprises. Finishing out this spot welder, we just got to do the back now. You see I got a different attachment for this. That other attachment would work. It's just no sense in holding this big bulky attachment when these two pinch arms, I think, do a way better job. As you would in a MIG welder, you're going to start in the center and you'll work your way out to both sides, pushing the panel along the way. For those who have never seen a spot welder, it works by pneumatically squeezing together, pinching the two panels, and there's different attachments, and it shoots a high rate of current. It's almost like a capacitor discharging as it's squeezing the two panels together, melting the panels. There's no gas involved because, it's not an open air arc that's creating the weld, and it holds it till the very end, releasing it at a preset time. We're going to move along to the radiator support on the Stage 2 Chassis Stiffening kit, and that's going to really hold the base together. I put the inner fender on. I would put the passenger inner fender on too if I had it, but we don't. And the main point of this is just to hold the radiator support in place, just to make sure our jigs lined up and there's no surprises. These parts are not being put on right now. That's why they're just vice gripped. I didn't really take any measurements. I just care where they meet the lower frame rails. You put the back part on first, you get it clamped in place, and then I'm test fitting the front because I'm going to go through and weld the back part that you can't get to first. So you see, we're going to tack it on first just to make sure everything's good before we go ahead and weld it. We're going to come back through, put the front part on, and then we'll go ahead and weld the back first. I do got to say, if you're buying this kit, and you weld the back on. Some people only put the front on. If you do put the back on, make sure you buy your radiator before you go to paint and body. It's going to have to be cleared, and you're going to have to cut this back bracket to clearance the radiator. Some might clear, but most, especially the aftermarket ones that stick out a little bit wider, will have to be modified. So we'll have to go ahead and do this in the future. But the front's all tacked in place, welded up, and then I go through with a screwdriver and I pull them real tight in between the jig and the back piece to squeeze it against the front to make sure I have a good welded surface. I am welding the sides completely now. I'm happy where it is, and I'll take the vice grips off the back piece in a second, and we'll go ahead and finalize the weld on this. Once it's completely welded up, we're going to go ahead and start disassembling the parts that we're not going to need and put them away for the future build.
We got the front frame rails and the bottom of the floor pans and trunk pan all complete on the Challenger with the Metalwork. We'll go ahead and do a quick walk around on it. You see the frame rails are in place. We're going to leave them the way they are right now until we get some more parts on the front end. I told you our firewall is our part that we're waiting on. We did put in our stage 2 chassis stiffening kit. You can see we got good penetration on the weld. There's a good heat affected zone. It's pretty much, you can see where I stopped welding one time on that whole run, but all in all, that will be put in epoxy also. This also, like I said, mocks up really good on my chassis jig. We did make sure with the parts we did have that we are in line. Let's walk around to the floor pan. I'll show you what we got going on. Right now, you saw the floor pans put in place. We got all the metalwork cleaned up, all the welds ground down. You could see some of it, but it is the bare metal. We did hit it with a DA with a 120 grit. We're gonna put it in the black epoxy primer. I don't always strip the inside of the floor pans down completely to bare metal. If there's areas like this, it's not the end of the world. There's gonna be undercoat on some of this stuff, sound deadener, a bunch of other stuff, and under carpet. So on the exterior body, always stripping the bare metal. We did put these 2 brackets in back here. I didn't show that. Another thing too, we do not have the automatic shifter in. That's on order with the firewall. It's going to be one big order with most of the rest of the parts for this car hopefully coming soon. So bear with us. We'll finish putting the automatic shifter in there and the console bracket. So, but we're going to seal it up for now. We'll walk around to the trunk pan and show you the trunk pan. We were able to get most of the spot welder. You could see the difference on the spot welder and how it really does a nice job. You don't have to clean it up, and it replicates more of a factory style weld. Another good thing about the spot welder, it doesn't put a lot of heat, so it doesn't burn any of the undercoat, the weld through primer, like you would as you're welding with the MIG welder. Another thing too, you don't have to grind it down, so you know your weld is strong the whole time. So we ran the spot welder all the way up to here where we couldn't reach because of the wheel well. Again, we don't install them exactly like the factory piece by piece. Some of these cars, you know, not everything has to be replaced. So we do what we can with the spot welder, and then we go ahead and we'll MIG it just like you would at home. The deck filler panel is removed. That's again on order, and that will be put on after. Everything's prepped. Like I said, everything come out really good. It's solid. You see the car still not moving anywhere. We got a good foundation on the car. Thank you for sticking along. We're gonna take a break on this car for at least a few weeks, maybe a month or two. Like I said, waiting on parts. So as soon as we get the parts in, we're gonna keep installing them and keep really driving on this car. I know a lot of people are really interested in it, and I want to show the whole process. So stay tuned with us. Thank you for sticking along again. We'll do some other videos. We got tons of projects in the shop, and comment, subscribe to our channel. We just hit over 1,000 people. I really appreciate everyone that helped make that happen, and the positive, comments and everything else that people have done on this. Thank you again, and stay tuned. We'll do another one soon. Take care.
Wrapping up the video, I'm going to just show you a couple pictures of the finished install in epoxy as it's drying. So you see there's some spots that are a little bit wetter than others, but here's a shot underneath. Everything's tight. Like I said, we're going to go back through when we go into rotisserie and finish cleaning up these welds, but you could see the penetration on the welds coming down from the top to the bottom. If you're installing a floor pan, front frame rails, or doing something else on the e-body, hopefully our videos are helping you out, and hopefully our previous videos. We'll keep putting them out there for your information and to help you out. If you know anyone that's into these kind of old restoration cars, tell them about our channel, and we'll see you on the next one.